defamation,
negligence, which is just
or things like appeals, because sometimes maybe you go to court and
and the different types of tort. Like, I'll just give brief examples.
is defend you or prosecute your case, after which the judge determines or the magistrate. Hello and welcome to the Sisters in Law podcast. My name is Beverly Mokaya and I'm here with
Aquila Mokaya. In this podcast, we discuss matters law.
From talking about contracts law to termination matters, employment to tax laws, family matters, and generally just commercial disputes, we've got you covered.
Remember to like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment down below.
Down below, yeah. So on today's episode, we will talk about something called the doctrine of laches. That's just a legal term, but it's just basically justice delayed is justice denied. So there's a time limit within which you can bring cases in court, depending on which type of case it is. Let's say, for example, if it's a contract and there's breach, if there is a tort, and we'll talk about tort, we'll understand what we mean by tort, T-O-R-T. There's a time limit within which you can bring torts in court. If it's a land matter, what other matter is there?
Said contracts, employment,
defamation,
negligence, which is just technically under tort.
Yeah. And also things like appeals, because sometimes maybe you go to court and in the lower court and the judgment is not in your favor, and let's say you want to try a higher court so that you get a more favorable judgment, you have to appeal. There's also a time limit within which you can appeal. So we will start with
land matters, generally, because land matters are quite rampant, especially in the villages.
Yeah, by the way.
Right? So now, when we are talking land issues, for example, we would start with maybe we are fighting over a boundary.
Yeah.
1. 2, maybe you're occupying my property illegally.
Which is actually the most
common.
Yes.
So the time limit is 12 years. So the other aspect of it also would be that after 12 years, if this person who's now, that's called adverse possession, this other person who is now, let's say, I'm person X, you're person Y.
Yeah.
You have some land which I come and occupy knowingly. So I know it's not my property, my piece of land.
Yeah.
So I come occupy it. Maybe I build a house, fence it,
plant
crops, trees, bring up structures, maybe a bathroom outside, a cow shed, and things like those for 12 years. But then again, you do not come and ask me about it.
Yeah.
Maybe you just pass around and you never ask whether that's my property.
Yeah.
So that's just called, like, it's undisturbed for 12 years straight. At a point where it's disturbed, then I have no right.
Counting.
Yes. So if I stay in your property for 12 years,
continuously,
for example, continuously, not that I stayed in 2001, left, came back in 2003, blah, 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 blah. It must strictly be 12 years and above. Yeah. So if it gets to 12 years, I'm able to ask that the registrar registers that title deed in my name, and you won't have like a legal right as against me. Because now what the law says is that for a land matter, you must come to court within 12 years. Yeah. Not unless there are other like specific or peculiar circumstances. For example, like there's an issue that we handled that the plaintiffs, the ones who are bringing this property, said that they were children.
Yeah.
Yeah, and their parents died sometime, and they died without going to school or something like that.
Yeah.
So now they have grown up, is when they now understand the law, they can bring it to court. You see,
Yeah.
that's like a valid reason.
That's a very valid
Like
reason.
I was a child, I wouldn't have
I
gone
didn't
to
have
court.
capacity.
Yeah. Now, those are the only times like you'd get specific circumstances when you can file such a suit after 12 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a nice one, by the way. Capacity would be a good reason. Because, of course, the law, mostly, there's usually a general rule and exceptions
to that general rule.
General rule. So now, like, the general rule would be 12 years, you cannot bring a suit of land against anyone. But an exception would be something like what Aquila has said. I was a child then. Maybe I
wouldn't have known.
I was 10 years old.
Yeah.
So now it would mean that the time would start counting after I attained 18.
An adult, now we start counting now 12 years.
Yes, because that's when I would have capacity to bring a suit. Yeah, so for land matters, that's adverse possession. It's the most common.
Yeah, very common.
Actually, when you go to the village courts, mostly now, the most courts outside of Nairobi, let's say Bungoma, places like those, you would find a lot of cases of adverse possession, even around Central. Yeah, so like it's not even a full suit, by the way.
Yeah.
It's not usually a full suit like it's not how
when you're making an application,
it's just an application.
It's just an application for the registrar to register me now as the person who was the adverse possessor to become now the owner of this property. And now it's going to be undisputed because now I would have a title deed.
You get a title deed. Now it becomes yours. So unless this person comes and said, maybe I interrupted you in 2006 by maybe bringing a suit, or I reported to the chief or something like that, you would be able to get title to that land.
Yeah. Also, I'm not just saying this, but if you are trying to be an adverse possessor, ensure that you maybe bring up structures, because when you're making that application, you must attach photos of what you have. If you planted maize, or maybe even if you don't live there, but maybe you planted maize
in
trees.
Actually,
trees.
Most people plant trees. Yeah,
it proves that, of course, now I had settled in this property for 12 years undisturbed, and the owner now, because even if the owner now comes challenging, he must bring a reason as to why I should not be given a title deed and 12 years have lapsed.
Yeah, that's a good one. So land matters, 12 years. And so which other one? The next one? Employment. Yeah. So employment, the cases that would be in employment would be, and you can refer to our episode 3. Or is it episode 2?
2.
Yeah, I think it's episode 2. Let's say you've been unfairly terminated from work. The procedure that they used was not the right procedure, or the reason for termination was not a good reason. Let's say also you're not given a fair hearing, or maybe a warning letter or things like that, and more details in episode 2. Or also maybe, for example, they faked or they disguised your termination as redundancy. So redundancy is where maybe they say, as a company, we want to restructure and we don't need your position anymore, or we just need to downsize, or things like that, because we are going down. So some of the positions will be done away with. Or another issue would be, let's say, summary dismissal. That's just when someone wakes up one day and tells you, why are you sleeping at work?
Go home.
Because now there are actually procedures that are supposed to be followed. Even if it's a gross misconduct, you have to give someone fair hearing. You cannot condemn someone unheard. And then also another instance, maybe there's discrimination at your workplace. Maybe you were not paid, or things like that. These are employment matters. If you have a problem with your employee or your employer. Mostly it's usually employees who have problems with employers. Actually, a good number of cases in the employment court are from employees. And by the way, most of them are won, at least 80%. So in the event of employment, you have 3 years.
After the letter of termination has been issued.
Exactly.
So if, for example, you are given a hearing, and then the hearing took long, because sometimes when you're given, like, so you're given warning letters, and then now you are brought before the board, so they have to give you a verdict, and then now you're given your official letter of termination. If you are given the letter of termination on Friday, so it starts counting on Friday. Even if you appeared before the board and you knew the determination was that you were fired, it doesn't start counting then. It starts after you've been given the letter of termination.
So, like, for example, there's a case where someone was working for an institution, and a case a corruption case was brought against this person, an anti-corruption case. And the policies of the company was that if you get an anti-corruption case in court, you get a suspension. So for that period, let's say, for example, he was brought before the anti-corruption court in 2010, yeah, and then the suspension started in 2010. But the case in court, the anti-corruption case in court, stayed in court for 10 years. And then after 10 years, now the decision was made that this person, for example, was corrupt or was guilty or whatever. And they were supposed to pay a fine, and they paid the fine. So now coming back to the organization, this organization, I think at some point they had terminated, I don't remember the facts clearly, but they had terminated his employment after giving the suspension without really consulting them. So this person brought the case in the employment court and said, I've been terminated wrongfully at this time and at this time. Now what the company came and said, the company came and said that you are out of time. It's been at least, I think, 7 years since we terminated your employment, your contract, and so you are out of time. So the excuse, or not the excuse, the reason that this guy came and gave in court was that, but during these 7 years, or during these 10 years, there was an anti-corruption court case. There was an anti-corruption case in court, and so during this time, we would not have established whether it was right for you to terminate my employment. Actually, I remembered the anti-corruption case went in his favor. So he was not guilty. So he came and said, you have terminated me wrongly because I was found not guilty. Then they came and said, oh wait, you're out of time. But he came and said, no, during this time the case was in court, and so we had not established whether the reason for your termination was valid. Yeah, actually I remember it in Kitambo. But yeah, something like that happened. So that would be a reason, because I had a pending case in court. I could not bring it within the 3 years. But generally for employment matters, 3 years. Yeah.
And because also it's very important, court normally tries to establish when did this time start running. Because if it starts running today, then it starts counting from today. But if, for example, there's a court case that runs for 10 years, and now we want to start counting now after the 10th year. So now that after the 10th year, we'll count 3 years after that. Yes.
Yeah. And actually the reason why the court imposes such time limits is because sometimes you might bring a case 10 years later and the witness has died, or there is no evidence that you can rely on. So it's very important to also ensure that we have, and also to encourage people to just come to courts faster, that the process is less strenuous and you get your justice. Remember, justice delayed is justice denied.
Yeah. So we would go to maybe contracts. So maybe, okay, when we talk about contracts, it's generally a breach of it. We have an episode on contracts, so you can just go and understand what breach is. Generally, when I don't do my bit
under contract, let's say we agreed
that I'm going to supply goods and you're going to pay me this amount of money, and then I supply the goods, then you don't pay me. So that means you have breached the contract, because now you have gone against the agreement, what we had agreed initially. So now, generally, if it's a contract, it's 6 years, regardless of the time. If the contract was breached in 2009, you should have brought that suit in 2015.
Oh, that's +6.
Yeah, that's now, like, we start counting. If it's 2009 November, it's like November 1st, like that.
So 2015
November.
Whether it's like that. If you pass the time limit with 1 day, trust me, the other advocate will
come and say that your time has lapsed. So generally for contracts, also on other issues like maybe
fraud,
misrepresentation. So like, for example, I got into a contract because you lied to me about something, and that contract, and where the person relied on it in executing the contract, even if the contract was for some time back, maybe 2009, but I discovered it in 2020, it starts counting from the time I discovered. So we start counting 6 years from the time of discovery, whether it's fraud or misrepresentation, which is the cause now of the breach or something like that.
So so again, refer to our videos on contracts, fraud and misrepresentation. You'll be able to understand all those things.
So we'd go to tort. And the different types of tort. I'll just give brief examples. medical negligence. Somebody came to give birth, the doctors didn't attend to them, they overbled and died. Or maybe somebody hurt themselves, the doctors didn't do anything about it. Or like that case that you were handling where I had gone for a heart surgery and they did a brain surgery instead. So that arises under medical negligence. Yeah.
I think another tort by there is how do you put it? An action against someone's personal body. Like there's a Latin term that I'm trying to interpret, to translate, but it just means like something done against the body of somebody else. Although it's not necessarily just like it's an act in personam, so that's how they say it. it's just crazy. Yeah, but anyway, so things like medical negligence, as Aquila has said, and also accidents. Refer to our previous episode on accidents. Let's say, for example, if you were injured or your car was destroyed in an accident. Something else would be a defamation is a tort, by the way, but now it has a different time limit, so we'll talk about it later
separately.
Yeah. And then something else would be, for example, let's say you went somewhere to swim. There's a swimming coach who has a duty of care to watch over everyone who's swimming there, and let's say someone drowned and
under their watch.
Under their watch, that's also a tort.
Then we'd also talk about trespass. If you go through somebody's property, or maybe you go and plant maize in somebody's land without telling them.
Those are torts generally. So for that you have 3 years
to bring a suit
against it. You know, actually mostly when you find accident cases, you usually find that you will just find that somehow conveniently the accident happened in 2020 November and the suit is being sued in 2023 November
or October.
Because the advocates usually know that
when the time elapses.
Let's say you gave me this file and I've stayed with it, but I know that 3 years cannot pass until before I bring that suit in court.
But for something like trespass, because if I'm passing through your land, how does it affect you as a person? For if I want to go and complain in court, for example, that you have passed through my property, like is it really a crime before we can bring it? Like I have to bring it within 3 years. So if you are stepping around my compound, what am I going to say? That you passed through my property within 3 years, you get. But you see, the issue you have to prove is that it caused me discomfort.
But they actually, in every case, before you bring a case, there's something called a cause of action. And for something to be considered a cause of action, it must have affected you. Like there has to be a degree,
an extent of being affected by that thing.
There should be damage to some degree. Like let's say, for example, actually now we're done talking about tort with the 3 year period. We can go to defamation as we emphasize on this thing of cause of action. For example, now defamation or slander or libel, those are the different names of defamation. Let's say if someone said something like this person is stupid, or either wrote it in a newspaper or said it verbally
to the hearing of others,
you have to demonstrate
how it affected you.
How has it affected me?
Maybe I called you corrupt and now you are fired because I said that you are corrupt. You could take me to court for defamation.
Or maybe my reputation has been damaged. That's also actually damaged.
That's majorly for politicians.
Because
they work on reputation.
So the time limit for defamation is
12 months.
12 months. That's a year
for you to bring an issue that you came and wrote that I have bad work ethic and now I've been fired from work. So as I bring this employment within the 3 years that we said, I have to bring the defamation within the 12 months that we have just said.
Yes. And I think with that, though, there's one more, appeals.
Oh yeah, we almost forgot about it. And it's very important.
It's very important because sometimes by the time a case is done, who unapata, let's say the wakili and the client wamekosana or something like that. So
maybe somebody wants to change their lawyer.
And they don't know that there's a limit within which you need to bring an appeal
again
if you lost in the lower court. And mostly maybe you'll find that wanakosana because, you know, people don't understand that you can actually lose a case.
Yeah, you can honestly lose if you didn't have a case.
Yeah, because the best your advocate can do is defend you or prosecute your case, after which the judge determines or the magistrate determines it. So unapata maybe when the case is over, someone is pissed off, issues, you know, I paid you and you lost the case, and you lost the case, and they just don't understand. But anyway, well, as you do this, understand that you have a time limit within which you can bring the case in the higher court. So if your case was in the small claims, we have a hierarchy of courts. So you have the small claims, after which you have the magistrate's court, which there is the senior, resident, principal, resident in whichever order. Then there's the chief magistrate, senior. And then after magistrate's court, you have the high court. After the high court, you have the Court of Appeal. And then after the Court of Appeal, you have the Supreme Court. That's the hierarchy. So depending on where you filed your case, depending on how much the value of the case, if it's below 20 million, if it's below 1 million, small claims, between 1 million and 20 million, magistrates court, above 20 million, high court. So depending on where you filed. So if you filed in the small claims court, you will have to appeal it at the high court. Also, if it's in the chief magistrate's court, you'll have to appeal it to still at the high court. Yes. Now you have 30 days. From the lower court to the high court. You have 30 days within which you are allowed to put in your memorandum of appeal. Your advocate will tell you what that is, but it's just the documents that you use to lodge an appeal. Most advocates actually just put it, even if they're not sure about the appeal. They just put it so that the time, you're not strained with the time. Yeah. Yes. So you just put it there, but you can always amend it later. And then from the high court to the Court of Appeal, you have 14 days within which you're supposed to put your notice of appeal. Those are just things that your advocate needs to know, but you don't need to know. But you just know you have 14 days. And then after the 14 days, you have like another 60 days where you have to put in file the appeal. Now file the actual documents of appeal. Yeah, so don't get caught out of time. Yeah, don't file things out of time. Specifically for appeals, you need to have a very serious reason. Yeah, like why you didn't, unless maybe you just didn't get documents on time. You need to have a very serious reason why you didn't fit within the time limit. Yeah, true. Yes. And of course, there are exceptions where, let's say, if you didn't file your appeal within time, you can always apply. You say that apply for extension of time, but just do it within time, because sometimes these applications can either be denied, accepted or denied. Granted or denied, allowed or denied, like whichever you choose. Terms. Yeah, so that's it. Yeah, about today's limitations of time. I hope you really learned a lot, and I hope you diarize the time so that you do not get caught out of time. Yeah, yes. Definitely. So if you reached the end of this episode, which I suspect you did, yeah, like, share, comment, subscribe. And if you have something you want us to talk about, feel free to put it in the comments. If you want to be a guest on our show, yeah, let's say you're an expert in a different field, feel free to also put it there. And we will see you next time. Bye. Bye.